My name is Sophia Williams, and at 28 years old, I was 3 days away from marrying Ethan Blackwood, the man I loved more than anything. For 2 years, we had built a life together, filled with laughter hikes, late-night talks, and a connection that seemed unshakable. We planned to marry in Chicago in a ceremony that combined his family's wealth and social standing with my own more modest roots. Everything felt perfect until a single afternoon turned my world upside down. His parents, Richard and Victoria Blackwood, invited me to tea and presented a prenuptial agreement, so one-sided it was less a contract than an ultimatum. Their message was blunt: sign it before 9:00 a.m. the next morning, or the wedding would be canceled. I left their mansion with tears clouding my vision, the thick document heavy in my hands. For years, I had allowed them to underestimate me. They saw me as a school teacher's daughter, a girl who should be grateful to marry into a powerful family. What they never knew was that behind my quiet apartment and modest car lay an inheritance of $7.5 million from my grandfather and a tech company I had built myself valued at another $1.5 million. Altogether, I had nearly $9 million to my name, but I had never flaunted it. I wanted Ethan to love me for who I was, not for what I owned. Still, their ultimatum forced me to face the truth. Hiding my financial reality had allowed them to paint me as a gold digger, when in truth, I was more than capable of protecting my own interests. That night, I cried in my apartment, replaying every subtle insult and every time Ethan's parents had dismissed me. I thought of Victoria's sly digs about my parents being commendable teachers of Richard, waving off my company as a hobby, and of Christmas dinners where Ethan's siblings had mocked me with casual disdain. Now, all those moments connected into a clear pattern. They had never seen me as worthy of their son. I confided in Jenna, my best friend since college, who reminded me of the truth. I was not powerless, and I had options. She urged me to call Harold Winters, my grandfather's trusted attorney, and I did. By 7:00 a.m. the next morning, we were sitting in my office, and Harold, sharp as ever, even in his 70s, studied the prenup with a look of disgust. He told me flatly it was the most one-sided agreement he had seen in decades. Instead of bending, he suggested we counter. If the Blackwoods wanted legal protections, we would draft our own one that honored both my assets and theirs. For hours, we worked carefully building a document that shielded my intellectual property, preserved both our independent wealth, and laid out fair terms for the future. When Harold asked whether I wanted to salvage the relationship, I admitted I did. I loved Ethan, but only if he was willing to stand beside me as a true equal. By mid-morning, I had a new prenuptial agreement in my bag and a plan in my mind. That afternoon, I arranged to meet Ethan privately, ready to reveal the truth about myself and demand clarity about where he truly stood. Ethan met me at Carlucci's, the Italian restaurant, where we had celebrated our first anniversary, and I could see the exhaustion in his face before he even sat down. His tie was crooked, his eyes shadowed, and for the first time since I had met him, he looked like the weight of his family's name was crushing him. He reached across the table for my hand, his voice breaking with apology, saying he was sorry for the ambush and that he had argued with his parents the night before. He insisted he had told them their ultimatum was unacceptable, but I needed to hear more than apologies. I needed to know if he truly saw me as his partner or as a woman to be managed while his family pulled the strings. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were the documents Ethan had never seen, statements showing my inheritance and the valuation of my company. He blinked stunned as he read the numbers aloud: $7.5 million in investments, $1.5 million in company value, and I explained why I had kept it private. I wanted to be loved for myself, not my bank account. His first reaction was shock, followed by something closer to hurt, asking why I hadn't trusted him enough to share this sooner. I told him honestly it was never about mistrust, but about testing the character of those around me. The sad truth was that his family had failed that test spectacularly. When the drinks arrived, I gave him the new prenuptial agreement Harold and I had drafted that morning. It was fair, balanced, and protected both of us equally. Ethan skimmed it quickly, his lawyer's training kicking in, and then looked at me with something close to relief. He admitted the terms were reasonable and far different from the one-sided trap his parents had given me. But the real question hung in the air. Would he stand with me against his family? I told him plainly that I wanted a marriage of equals, a partnership built on respect and truth. I could not vow to spend my life with him if his parents continued to treat me as if I were beneath them. Ethan took my hand again, his grip firm this time, and told me that when he left his parents' house the night before, he had made his choice. He chose me. For the first time, I believed him not the boy who tried to keep the peace, but the man who was finally willing to stand up for us. Together, we decided the next step. That very evening, we would meet his parents face to face, present the new prenup, and draw a line that could never again be crossed. At 6:00 p.m. sharp, Ethan and I arrived at Lakeview Restaurant, one of Chicago's most discreet high-end establishments, chosen deliberately as neutral ground. I wore a cream dress with a tailored blazer, my grandmother's pearls at my neck, while Ethan's navy suit struck the perfect balance of authority without arrogance. We were united, ready and prepared for a confrontation that could define the future of our marriage before it even began. As Ethan predicted, his parents arrived deliberately late, sweeping into the private dining room with the air of people accustomed to control. Richard's charcoal suit and Victoria's burgundy designer dress were both calculated statements of power. She kissed Ethan's cheek, as if nothing were amiss, ignoring me entirely, while Richard wasted no time asking if I had come to a sensible decision. Their confidence was palpable. They expected me to fold, to accept the terms they dictated. But this time, the dynamic shifted. Ethan spoke first, declaring their document unacceptable and emphasizing that springing it on me 3 days before our wedding had been inappropriate and disrespectful. Richard bristled, insisting it was the standard Blackwood family agreement, but Ethan pressed on. That was when I opened my portfolio, slid across Harold's counter-proposal, and calmly explained that we agreed legal protections were important, but only if they were fair. I added a second folder on top, the one containing my financial portfolio. With a steady voice, I told them my current net worth stood at approximately $9 million, $7.5 million in diversified investments from my grandfather's estate, and $1.5 million from the valuation of my tech company. The silence that followed was heavy. Victoria's face flushed crimson as she struggled to reconcile the image she had painted of me with the reality now in front of her. Richard, ever the lawyer, studied the documents with disbelief that turned slowly into reluctant respect. His words were measured when he admitted the information changed things significantly. Victoria, however, faltered. She stammered about my modest car, my teacher parents, her tone laced with the disbelief of someone whose assumptions had just crumbled. I reminded her gently that I valued financial responsibility over flashy displays, lessons instilled in me by the very parents she had mocked. Richard tried to recover the upper hand, insisting they would need time to review my agreement with their attorneys. I reminded him of his own deadline, 9:00 a.m. that morning, and told him they now had until 3:00 p.m. tomorrow. Ethan reinforced my words, making it clear that any adjustments must preserve the balanced protection we had outlined. For the first time since meeting them, I watched the Blackwoods recalibrate in real time, forced to treat me as an equal. Victoria offered something resembling an apology, a halting admission that she had misjudged me. It was not perfect, but it was enough to mark the beginning of change. When they left, Ethan pulled me into his arms and whispered that I had been magnificent. I corrected him with a smile. It was not just me, it was us. Together. As we stepped out into the twilight hand in hand, I felt for the first time that our marriage would not be built on shadows and silence, but on truth, respect, and the courage to stand our ground. 2 days later, I stood in a quiet antechamber of the Drake Hotel, dressed in the sleek gown I had chosen months earlier, the one Victoria once dismissed as budget-friendly. Yet as I caught my reflection, I felt radiant not because of the dress, but because of the transformation inside me. Confidence had replaced the weight of secrecy. My mother fussed with my train, Jenna adjusted my veil, and both of them whispered that I carried myself differently now, as if finally unafraid to shine. They were right. Facing the Blackwoods had stripped away the last of my hesitation. A knock came at the door, and to everyone's surprise, Victoria stepped in. She wore soft blue instead of her usual intimidating burgundy, and her expression lacked its sharp edges. For a moment, she simply studied me, her eyes softer than I had ever seen. Then she said the words, "I never expected I owe you an apology, Sophia. A proper one." She admitted her behavior had been condescending, her judgment clouded by assumptions, and for the first time I believed her sincerity. From her clutch, she drew a velvet box and handed it to me. Inside lay sapphire and diamond earrings, heirlooms from Ethan's great-grandmother, a woman who, like me, had married into the Blackwoods against resistance and had saved the family during the Depression through sheer determination. The symbolism was clear, and for the first time, Victoria was extending something more than tolerance, respect. I replaced my pearls with the sapphires, allowing her to clasp them on me herself. It was a quiet, fragile bridge between us, but one that mattered deeply. As she left, she whispered, "Welcome to the family. Truly." Minutes later, my father arrived misty-eyed as he prepared to walk me down the aisle. His voice trembled when he called me his brilliant girl, and my heart swelled with the reminder of the values he and my mother had instilled: work hard, live honestly, and never forget who you are. When the doors opened and I stepped into the grand ballroom, Ethan's eyes found mine immediately. Whatever tension remained between our families melted in that moment. His gaze brimmed with love, steady and unwavering, and all the stress of contracts and confrontations faded into the background. We spoke traditional vows, but in our voices was the weight of everything we had endured and the promise of a future where truth and equality would always anchor us. Even Victoria dabbed at her eyes during the ceremony, a sight I never thought I would witness. At the reception, the shift in dynamics was unmistakable. Richard introduced me to business associates with pride in his tone rather than dismissal. Victoria placed me beside one of her dearest friends, a federal judge whose approval she clearly valued, as though eager now to showcase me rather than diminish me. Ethan leaned close during our first dance and murmured, "Amazing what $9 million can do for one's social standing." I smiled at him, replying softly, "It's not about the money, it's about demanding respect." He kissed my forehead and whispered that he had never been prouder to call me his wife. That night, as the music swelled and our guests celebrated around us, I understood something profound. The crisis that nearly broke us had instead fortified our foundation. We were no longer the couple who let his parents dictate the terms. We were partners, equals, and more united than ever. Our honeymoon on the Greek islands felt like a dream after the storm we had just endured. For 2 blissful weeks, we wandered whitewashed villages, swam in turquoise waters, and shared meals under starlit skies, where no one knew or cared about the Blackwood name or my financial portfolio. We were simply Ethan and Sophia, 2 people in love, finally breathing freely. We spoke about our future the way couples often do, but with a sharper clarity now. We promised to build a life as equals, to set boundaries with our families, and to make decisions together, always together. When we returned to Chicago, those promises were quickly tested. Victoria began hinting about the long-standing Blackwood tradition of Sunday dinners, an expectation that their married children and spouses attend every week without fail. Ethan and I discussed it privately, and with new confidence in his voice, he told me once a month would be our limit. I agreed. To my surprise, Victoria accepted the compromise with only a trace of reluctance. Perhaps she finally understood that boundaries once established were no longer up for negotiation. Richard showed his shifting respect in more practical ways. He invited me to consult on technology upgrades for the family law firm and listened when I explained why his outdated systems needed overhauling. When my company secured a major contract with the Chicago public school system, he sent me a congratulatory note, professional, warm, and absent of the condescension that had colored his earlier remarks. Ethan noticed the change too. He teased me that I had become Richard's secret weapon, and though I laughed, I knew it marked something important acknowledgement, not as an outsider tolerated for Ethan's sake, but as someone who had earned her place at the table. In our own lives, Ethan and I purchased a home downtown using a blend of our resources, a space chosen not by tradition, but by love. We made financial decisions side by side, each bringing our strengths. He had a lawyer's precision. I had an entrepreneur's vision. There was no imbalance, no silent resentment, only a rhythm of partnership we both treasured. The prenuptial agreement we had fought so hard over sat locked in a deposit box, its greatest value, not in its clauses, but in the process of creating it. It had forced us to strip away illusions, to reveal our truths, and to insist on equality before vows were ever spoken. Looking back, I realized that the Blackwoods' ultimatum, cruel though it felt at the time, had been a gift in disguise. Without it, I might have entered marriage still hiding parts of myself, still fearful of being judged. Without it, Ethan might never have found the strength to stand against his family. Confrontation had been painful, but it had also been cleansing, forcing us both to grow. Love, I learned, is not enough on its own. True partnership requires courage, vulnerability, and the determination to refuse anything less than respect. 6 months into our marriage, life felt steadier, though the echoes of that week before the wedding lingered as a constant reminder of what we had survived. Victoria, true to her word, or perhaps true to her newfound caution, softened her approach. Her sharp remarks dulled, and though she never fully abandoned her need for control, she no longer wielded it like a weapon against me. When she suggested family brunches or offered opinions on how we should decorate our home, I learned to respond with calm boundaries rather than silence. Surprisingly, she accepted those boundaries more often than not, and sometimes even seemed relieved to let go of her need to dominate. Richard, on the other hand, found ways to engage with me professionally, as though testing whether I truly belonged in their world. When he asked my advice on integrating new legal software, I gave him a thorough analysis with cost projections and implementation strategies. He listened carefully later, admitting my plan had saved the firm both time and money. That moment, small as it was, signaled something larger, his recognition that I was not just Ethan's wife, but a capable businesswoman in my own right. Ethan and I continued to build our own traditions. We hosted dinners for friends in our new home, mixing laughter and late-night board games with discussions about law technology and the future we were shaping together. Sometimes, when he caught me working late into the night on EduTech solutions, he would bring me coffee and sit beside me quietly, his presence steady and supportive. Those nights reminded me why I had chosen him, not for the name, not for the wealth, but for the man who believed in my fire, even when his family doubted it, yet challenges lingered. At a charity gala months later, I overheard one of Victoria's old friends whisper that I had married well for a teacher's daughter. The sting of those words was sharp, but I smiled, walked over, and introduced myself as the founder and CEO of an educational software company currently partnered with the Chicago public school system. The look on her face, followed by an awkward silence, was the sweetest vindication. Later that evening, Ethan leaned down and murmured, "You didn't just marry well, Sophia. You are well. They're just slow to catch up." His words sealed the reminder that respect was no longer something I begged for. It was something I commanded by standing in my truth. The prenup that had once threatened to end our wedding became a symbol of something far greater. It represented the line I had drawn the moment I refused to be less than who I was. It reminded me that wealth means different things to different people. To the Blackwoods, it was a legacy to protect. To me, it was independence, freedom, and the ability to choose my path. Those two perspectives did not always align, but they no longer collided head-on. We had found a way to coexist, and more importantly, Ethan and I had found a way to thrive beyond it. As the first year of our marriage drew to a close, I often reflected on how different things could have been if I had simply signed the Blackwoods' original agreement or walked away in anger. Either path would have left me diminished, one by surrender, the other by regret. Instead, by choosing confrontation and truth, I had discovered the strength of my own voice and the resilience of our relationship. Ethan and I had proven to ourselves that we could withstand pressure, not by avoiding it, but by facing it head-on. Family dynamics continued to evolve in subtle but important ways. Victoria remained a woman of strong opinions, but there were moments when her guard slipped, revealing glimpses of genuine affection. She began inviting me to share stories about my company at dinners, sometimes even asking questions that suggested admiration rather than suspicion. Once, when I spoke about expanding our software to underserved districts, she surprised me by saying, "That's important work. I can see why Ethan admires you." It was perhaps the closest she had come to a blessing, and though quietly offered, it meant more to me than the jewels she had placed in my hands on my wedding day. Richard's respect deepened over time as well. He involved me in larger discussions about how technology could modernize the family's law firm, occasionally even deferring to my judgment when debates arose among his partners. These gestures, though professional in nature, carried a personal undertone, his recognition that my presence in the family brought value beyond the personal connection to his son. For a man who once dismissed me entirely, it was a profound shift. Through it all, Ethan stood firmly by my side. He had learned to recognize when his family's influence crept too close, and he never hesitated to draw the line. When Victoria suggested we purchase a home in Lake Forest to be closer to them, Ethan gently but firmly told her that our lives were in the city, built on choices we had made together. I saw the flash of disappointment in her eyes, but I also saw something new: respect that her son had finally stepped into his own authority. The greatest lesson of all was one I carried quietly within myself. For years, I had hidden my wealth out of fear that it would distort how people saw me. Yet when revealed in the crucible of conflict, it became not a weapon, but a shield. It demanded that others view me as more than they assumed, but it also reminded me that true power lies not in numbers on a page, but in the courage to stand firm when underestimated. Looking back, I realized the ultimatum that nearly broke me had in truth been the catalyst that set me free. I was no longer the modest schoolteacher's daughter tolerated at the Blackwood table. I was Sophia Williams' entrepreneur wife and equal partner, walking into a future built not on secrecy or submission, but on respect, love, and unwavering truth. If you've ever faced people who underestimated you, I hope my story reminds you that you don't need to hide your worth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be less than who you are. If this journey resonated with you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and triumph, and let me know in the comments how you've stood your ground when others doubted you.